Good afternoon to our viewers in Germany and good morning to our viewers in the United States. Hello, I'm Steve Sokol, the president of the American Council on Germany, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for today's Kaffeepause, where we regularly check in with a journalist based in Germany to talk about the news stories behind the headlines. And today I'm delighted to speak with Melanie Amann. She's a member of the editorial team at Spiegel and based in Berlin. Melanie, herzlich willkommen. It's great to have you back.
Vielen Dank, dear Stephen. It's great to be back.
Well, I've been looking forward to reconnecting with you in this Kaffeepause format for a while. So I'm delighted that we have a chance to just chat about what's going on in domestic politics in Germany and in world affairs. And I'd like to sort of start by asking my standard question at the Kaffeepause. Can you tell us about the Stimmung in Berlin at the moment? What's the political mood like? This is a big week, right? There's a vote on the budget. As some listeners will remember, there was a blow up before the summer recess over the election of Frauke Brosius-Gersdorf, a law professor whose nomination to the Federal Constitutional Court became a political scandal. And there's a vote expected on that on Thursday. So there's a lot happening in Germany, but how's the mood?
Well, let me first say, Stephen, thank you for having me. I think it's a great format that you've established, and you've definitely got the makings of a Spiegel journalist, the way you're persisting in inviting people to talk on this platform. It's very impressive. And looking at the number of people you've had already and the interesting colleagues, it's a pleasure to be here.
Well,
As
thank
for
you.
mood, I think well, if I can summarize it, my impression it's the yearning for normalcy, like the urge to have just a normal parliamentary process this week without any bad surprises, with normal institutional cooperation. I feel that the government, the coalition partners are very much trying to establish a routine and just hope for a week without bad surprises.
So that might be the hope, but is that the expectation that people have?
I actually do think it might work this week. I mean, with the current international situation, you never know, but domestically, the election, the vote for the three judges on Thursday is expected to go without a hiccup this time. I think everybody's so determined to make it work that I don't expect any surprises from that. Um, as for foreign policy, I'm curious to see how the further development on Israel is going to develop. I think it's going to be interesting to see if the question of the recognition of a Palestinian state might in some way blow up, because we've had comments from our foreign minister this morning before his departure to this international conference, and I feel that the CSU might chime in at one point, making it clear they're against the recognition of a Palestinian state. So, and Wadephul had said we should get the process started slowly. He had said that a few weeks before, but he was way more cautious then. And my impression is he was more direct now. So let's see how
It
that
seemed,
plays
I
out.
mean, I would like to talk to you about Berlin's view on Israel and the situation in Gaza and the discussion at the moment about the creation of a Palestinian state. Because it seemed to me that Foreign Minister Wadephul said that it's a goal to achieve a Palestinian state, but that's the end result, not the first step. And so there seems to be a debate over sort of sequencing, if you will, with a number of other countries, including the United Kingdom, and I guess today France, in a meeting with Saudi Arabia. Macron is making a statement about the creation of a separate state. There doesn't seem to be the same sort of alignment with some of the other European partners.
That's true. That's definitely the case. And I think that the foreign minister is getting the feeling of being isolated within Europe with his position. And definitely the other member states, aside, I think, from Finland or from, I think there are very few states who are categorically against this and who are also, Germany is one of the few countries who are still want to keep Israel in this international treaty with the European Union and basically be open for weapons deliveries. I mean, Merz has announced it's stopped, but it's still under, my impression is that his position hasn't substantially changed compared to the former administration. So I think that the pressure is rising, and as always in politics, it's the old saying, "Das Sein bestimmt das Bewusstsein." Like you have the statements that were happening in the campaign, and now that you have your position in the government, you realize how difficult it is to go through with your position. So in the campaign, the CDU was very clearly criticizing Olaf Scholz for not sending more weapons, being more like vociferously supporting the Israeli government. And now all of a sudden, when they have to deal with the government of Benjamin Netanyahu themselves, and they're in charge, and it gets increasingly hard to justify the kind of unconditional solidarity that they demanded before. Things are starting to shift, but my impression is that Merz doesn't really know where it's going in general. I think he's kind of feeling his way forward and flip-flopping a little bit.
So I was going to ask you a little bit about this because it does seem as if Friedrich Merz has been oscillating a little bit in his position. I mean, of course, Germany has traditionally been one of Israel's closest allies. And I think a lot of people were very surprised in the spring when Friedrich Merz was very critical of the Israeli offensive in Gaza and used very strong terms, which one didn't necessarily expect. And then just last month, he announced that Germany would partially suspend the export of arms to Israel. So, at other times, he's been very supportive of the Israeli government, but there have been some contradictions. And so I wonder, to what degree are you able to share with us what you think Friedrich Merz really thinks when it comes to Germany's policy on Israel and the war in Gaza? Is there a
What he
pattern?
really thinks. Well, I believe that he's under the influence of the direct exchange with the Israeli government, like the immediate. I mean, he has been in touch with them before as well, but obviously, as an opposition leader, you have a different kind of role, and he's very much under the impression of like talking to European partners like Macron. And I don't know if you remember his appearance in the Bundestag before the election when he was like slamming Olaf Scholz
Mm-hmm.
from the mantle, saying like, you are not sending weapons and you're not protecting Israel. And if I were in charge, I would do it differently. And then I remember Scholz jumping into the plenary hall, like back from his seat on the government bench to respond as like a regular member of parliament, saying like, my government is sending weapons. We actually just green-lighted it. So we talked about highly confidential government decisions. Was quite a controversial move, but it showed the amount of pressure that Friedrich Merz had succeeded in putting out on Scholz. So what is he really thinking? I think he feels frustrated. He's seeing that, like, diplomatically to the Israeli government, it doesn't really matter what he's saying or his appeals to show more compassion for the Palestinian civilians falls on deaf ears, and he is so as soon as it kind of regards him as a person or he feels he's not being taken seriously, he changes his policy positions, is my
Mm-hmm.
impression, which is understandable, but is also maybe a bit problematic considering the fact that he has to separate his own person from what is actually like what his role is. So
Yeah. I mean, certainly as the war in Gaza has been unfolding during the Scholz government, people kept coming back to Germany's Staatsräson, the reason of state in its support for Israel, and that was sort of a primary concern for many. Um, do you think that this sort of notion of Staatsräson has waned a little, has is not quite as present for people, or do you think it remains important, particularly to somebody like Friedrich Merz, but he's just trying to navigate a very different situation?
Yeah, I think it's the latter, and I think it's a process of realizing that the Staatsräson means solidarity with the state of Israel, but not necessarily the government of Israel.
Hmm.
This is a perception that has found more and more acceptance in the German political sphere, but so far, or as of late, it's only CDU and CSU are coming around to this now, and they
Hmm.
used to be more, it used to be the same for them. Like you are supporting Israel, so you have to support Netanyahu, or you have to support Sharon or whoever was in charge. And now I feel that they're realizing, okay, there's a gap between, like, look at the Israeli public, look at mass protests against the government. So are we really supporting Israel? Are we really helping Israel by what we're doing politically right now, and
Hmm.
by supporting especially the right wingers within the government?
Yeah.
So
Melanie, how consequential do you think the sort of European disunity is over this issue? I mean, you talked a little bit about Emmanuel Macron, and of course, it's expected that he's going to give a big speech at the General Assembly this week, recognizing Palestinian statehood. Um, I've heard some reporting that one of the reasons why Matz might not be coming to New York for the UN General Assembly is sort of to avoid being in the spotlight over this issue when there are such diverging viewpoints. I mean, obviously, the other reason is that this week the budget is being passed in the Bundestag, and he needs to focus on domestic politics. But how consequential do you think this sort of different stances, particularly between Paris and Berlin, on the Palestinian question?
I think it is a problem, but compared to, for example, the question of Ukraine and Russia, it's a smaller problem. Maybe also because the recognition of a Palestinian state does not have immediate consequences for, like, everyday European Union decisions or the process of decision making. It is a cause of conflict, or it's also simply of dissents
Hmm.
between the two leaders, or between the leaders in general. And it's Germany is to a point isolated, so it changes the mood.
Hmm.
I think the other topics are more pressing, and I do believe, I mean, I've talked to people from the administration about it, and I think it's credible that Merz feels he needs to do more domestically. He has been criticized for being the Außenkanzler, for being mainly traveling and doing Wadefuhl's job, basically doing playing the foreign minister within the chancellery. So he needs to have not an early win, but he needs to have a win on the domestic issues, or he should need to
Hmm.
show some results. So this is why, mainly why he's staying here.
So we'll come to domestic politics in just a moment, but I want to maybe talk briefly about the state of the Franco-German partnership more broadly. I mean, this is one issue. As you mentioned, for many Europeans, Ukraine is probably more important, and certainly this is an area where the European leaders have shown more of a united front. Um, What's your sense about the relationship between Macron and Merz? There were many people who really felt that the relationship between Scholz and Macron was not very good. And yet Macron at this point is perceived by many to be a lame duck, given that his term is coming to an end. He's facing, of course, his own domestic challenges as well. What's the state of this very important partnership?
I think it's going well. I think it's one of the early achievements of Chancellor Merz, that he has a close and I think trusting relationship with Macron, and the fact that he got invited to Fort de Brégançon and that he was in this beautiful southern French atmosphere, and there are lots of meetings, lots of going back and forth, lots of consultations. I feel that it's going well. I think it's something for once that even a Spiegel journalist can't find anything critical to say about.
Well, and it's something that Friedrich Merz had put high on his agenda before he came in, right? Rebuilding trust with Germany's immediate neighbors, France and Poland. And so he has put some time and energy into both relationships.
And
That
indeed, it's a
being
problem that Macron is kind of, you feel he's going down. So
right,
this relationship is going great, but how long is this going to last?
right.
So,
And I mean, given that Merz has another 4 years, almost 4 years in office, he also needs to be thinking about the relationship with France after Macron is no longer in office.
mm,
And so that's important as well. But shifting to the east, I'd love to get your readout on the visit by the Polish president. He was in Berlin this week. I guess on Tuesday of last week he visited. It's not something I think that some German leaders were excited about because Karol Nawrocki is a nationalist who's backed by a pretty populist right-wing party, the Law and Justice Party or Peace Party. There have been discussions in recent years about having Berlin pay reparations for Nazi Germany's occupation of Poland. Um, how did that visit go, and how are things with Germany's eastern neighbor?
well, my impression is that things went quite smoothly. That Merz and Nawrocki actually had some, I wouldn't say chemistry, but they found they had a good level of communication, was my impression from what I heard from behind the scenes in the chancellery. There was maybe the touchy topic that when these drone provocations happened from coming from Russia, from what I heard, the Polish side felt that Germany could have reacted faster in
Hmm.
showing solidarity or showing, and they felt that maybe they were a bit slow to react, but that was apparently smoothed over, and they have found talking points, and I think that for the Polish side, the relationship with Merz is easier than the one with our president Steinmeier, because he's more regarded as being pro-Russia, which he is not. I mean, he's not like, I wouldn't say not at all, he's a pro-Russian president, but he's being perceived as somebody being part of SPD and for a long time being very interested in keeping up Russian gas supplies and everything, also in his role as a foreign minister. And I think for some reason, maybe that they felt, okay, this is a moment to turn to Merz and to improve the relationship with him
Hmm.
compared to with Steinmeier.
Well, and it could also be simply also with the sort of shift in government from the traffic light coalition under social democratic leadership to a coalition led by Christian Democrats, right? These are right of center, more conservative parties, that there's a fundamental alignment that's a little bit easier
Mhm.
right off the bat.
Mm.
Um, you mentioned the Russian incursion into NATO airspace. Obviously, there was the drone. I don't want to say attack necessarily, but the
Mhm.
drones that were flying over Poland. But now over the weekend, there were Russian fighter jets over Estonia. I guess there were three of them for a total of 12 minutes. This has sparked a meeting in the UN Security Council today, a NATO meeting tomorrow. Estonia has evoked Article 4, which allows any member state to request consultation with other members if they believe that their territorial integrity has been threatened. This has only been invoked, I think, 9 times or 10 times since the alliance was founded. How's the response in Germany to these Russian incursions into Europe, right? It sort of brings the conflict in Ukraine even closer to home. Is it something that is getting attention, both in the media but also in the public.
It's interestingly during the first, let's call it wave, or the first round, when the drone incursions happened in Poland, I think the German public was very alert and there was great excitement about it. The second time around in Estonia, I feel the Estonian incident has gained way less response, public response. I mean, obviously not political response, but like in the general public, I feel they've already, after the first round, they've used up the excitement they had, and they're now watching it and thinking, okay, maybe this is our new normal, or they only were like registered it but did not get too worked up about it, which is surprising. I mean, this is just my personal perception. Maybe a different colleague would tell you otherwise, but I was also, I noticed like from the readers' reactions, people reading the stories that we put out, like the amount of interest was way higher the first time around.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I mean, I would think that there would be a sense of being threatened that would increase, particularly given that Germany now has its own Bundeswehr forces in the Baltic states as well, right? This sort of
Mm.
brings the conflict even closer to home. But it's certainly something that's worth watching. I mean, I will be curious to see what happens tomorrow at the NATO meeting. I think that that's probably more consequential than what happens in the Security Council today. But I'm very curious to see how this unfolds. And
I mean,
and
Russia is obviously testing how we're reacting, especially how the US are reacting, but also how NATO as a whole is reacting, and that the jury's still out there. I mean, it's still depending, like you said, what these meetings result in, or what the atmosphere is, and like what the outcome will be. Then we will see if there are further provocations or if maybe they pull back or hold back in the future.
someone just submitted a question asking if there's a sense of why Russia is engaging in this provocation at this time.
Yeah, I think it's to test the waters, to test the solidarity within NATO, and especially to test the US response. I think this
Mhm.
is crucial.
Yeah.
This, like, how supportive will Donald Trump be?
Yeah. So again, something well worth watching, and certainly something that will occupy us in the weeks to come. Switching more to the domestic situation in Germany, one of the big topics also for the Merz government has been economic policy. There's been a lot of discussion about needing to jumpstart the economy, dealing with issues like slow or no growth rates, high energy prices, a lack of qualified labor, skilled labor for certain jobs and certain positions. Um, what have you been seeing in terms of the contours of a new economic policy under the Merz government, and particularly Katharina Reiche, the economics minister, who's responsible for developing this new industrial policy, if you will?
Well, she has been a bit like her appearances have been a bit pale, or she has not like exposed herself much to the German public. Interestingly, she does not, I have not seen her in a single talk show. I don't know if she refuses to do them in general, or but I've seen a few interviews, but mainly in digital or print publications, not like
Not live.
on camera. And the few times she gave speeches that resonated, I'm not sure the message was what she intended to put out.
Hmm.
And I registered that after the last coalition meeting, the Koalitionsausschuss, where the heads of the government parties were discussing the next strategic steps, they announced an auto summit and a steel summit. So it was mainly about economic policy. And I think the name Katharina Reiche fell only once, if at all. I believe I heard it once during Merz's press conference, but it was
Hmm.
mainly Friedrich Merz and Markus Söder talking about how they were going to save the economy. And I mean, to be fair, the coalition has had a few projects, has tried with a few projects to revive the economy. There was the Stromsteuer. There was, I mean, on a European level, they started the process for the Industriestrompreis. Not sure if you have a catchy translation of that.
Yeah, the commercial price of electricity and of energy, right?
The
For
industry.
the
Yeah.
private sector.
And so there have been a few projects that should help, and but there's a lot of psychology, I think, and a lot of
Yeah.
uh, how do you say, optimism? Like, do you feel optimistic, or do you feel that it's a reliable climate for investments? And
Yeah.
Merz is going to present his new investment czar this week. I think it's
So I did
tomorrow.
want to ask you about that because that's something I picked up on in the press as well, that the federal government is planning on bringing on a so-called chief investment officer.
Mhm.
And once again, this is something that's sort of being driven out of the chancellery, it seems, and not something that's coming from the economics ministry. Uh,
Yeah.
what's your sort of take on this new role?
I feel, I wonder what the opposition leader Friedrich Merz would have said if Olaf Scholz had installed like a guy in the government charged with attracting investment.
Hmm.
Like he would probably have said, okay, finally we have socialism in Germany. I mean, interestingly, this, I don't know if you caught Söder's remarks at the coalition meeting when he said, okay, there's going to be the automobile summit, and it has to be a summit where there's not just talk, like we really have to get things going, like we have to like when the market for automobiles is being divided up globally, like we need to make sure that Germany gets their share. So it's like, okay, so the German government is making sure that the German car industry gets their share of the global markets. I mean, isn't that the job of the companies to do that?
Hmm.
And it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, we have to make sure that, you know, electric cars, they're like driving computers, rolling computers. So we have to make sure that it's not just about selling the machine, it's about selling the electronics, and we have to
Hmm.
make sure like the technology is up to speed and up to date. And you feel like, why? And who said this was your job? You know, what isn't that the job of the CEOs of the car manufacturers to stay to make sure their product is economically viable or attractive, like an attractive
Hmm.
product for people to buy and competitive. And so I feel there's something, it's an approach to economic policy that you know from the Social Democrats, but it sounds very like there's such a huge nervousness about this government. They really try to get the economy going that they try to meddle with it a little bit, and
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's a healthy soziale Marktwirtschaft approach.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's still, I mean, obviously this government is still in its early phases, right? And so there have also been some stumbling blocks along the way. This government came in saying that it wanted to try to show more unity than the previous government had shown. You started our conversation by saying that people are sort of yearning for normalcy, and that the coalition partners are trying to find stability.
Mm.
And I guess, you know, one of my questions to you would be, how do you see the coalition between Christian Democrats and Social Democrats right now? And how much visibility are the Social Democrats having, right? They had a historically bad election results in the last election, but they were able to negotiate that into a pretty strong position in the government. Are they, you know, fulfilling that role, or are we just not seeing very much from them?
I feel we're hearing quite a lot from them, especially when it comes to social policy. I mean, there's the debate about the Bürgergeld,
Yeah.
about social benefits and reform of our social system in general. And I feel that they've made their points quite clear, but the problem is that these points are so contradictory to what the CDU-CSU side have said so far that that's what makes it such a rocky start. I think at one point the SPD leader Bärbel Baas called Merz's position bullshit. I mean,
Hmm.
literally, I think she literally
Right.
said bullshit. So, I mean, if you need a barbecue like a, how do you say, a barbecue to make up your conflicts, or to get together again, or to create a joint spirit. And you need like 2 or 3 or 4 of these meetings to just to create some basic harmony within the coalition at this early point. It's it's not a good sign, I think. I
Yeah,
think that it's a sign of goodwill. I think they certainly have the goodwill to try to get
yeah,
things going, but the fact that it doesn't come organically, or they haven't like established the modus operandi,
yeah.
the technicalities of government yet.
Well, but these parties also know that there is a lot at stake, right? There is an awful lot at stake. I think that the hope is that the coalition will hold until 2029 when the next election is slated to take place and not collapse like the last government did. Um, but there had to be a bit of a ripple effect following the local elections in North Rhine-Westphalia last week when the AfD, the Alternative for Germany, almost tripled its support in those local elections. Now, granted, this was not an election of the Landtag or the state parliament. These were municipalities that were going to the polls. But I think it was pretty surprising for a lot of people to see how strong the AfD was in the most populous state
Mm.
in Germany.
I mean, this, you can say the glass is half full or half empty also for the AfD. I mean, they did not manage to get a single Bürgermeister,
Hmm.
and not even close. And whenever they got into the second round of voting, like the Stichwahl, they are still so far away from winning it. I mean, and compare their election result to their polls on a federal level.
Hmm.
So it's honestly, I would have expected them to get a higher result even.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I mean, of course, they've established themselves, which is bad news, but at the same time, they haven't scored as big as we had feared.
yeah.
So I feel these results left me relatively calm, I have to say.
But of course, I think next year will be more telling with a number of state elections and Landtag elections, including in Eastern Germany, where the AfD has been polling as high as 40% in some places. And so this has to be an issue of concern for the senior party leadership in the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats of how are they going to address the concerns of the voters who the AfD is able to appeal to, right? This is part of the reason why the economic policy and the social welfare policy become so important because this government needs to act and respond to a number of issues that are concern to the voters.
Absolutely. And I think the issue, especially in Sachsen-Anhalt, is that you don't, I mean, who do you have as coalition partners there? I mean, the FDP and the Greens are practically non-existent. The SPD is scraping by the 5%
Yeah,
threshold in the polls. So there's only like the two strong parties are CDU and AfD.
yeah,
So, I mean, God forbid AfD gets an absolute majority. Like this, at least you can say that the only upside of this is that CDU will be spared the question, like, should we cooperate with them or not?
right.
What happens if the only way to form a government at all will be to in any way cooperate with a party that has been deemed, like, how do you say, definitely unconstitutional,
Yeah,
gesichert rechtsextrem.
yeah,
So what happens then? And I'm not sure that the party leadership of CDU in Berlin has grasped like the consequences that this can have for Merz as a
yeah,
party leader,
yeah,
because this will be like his credibility as the leader of CDU is will be put into question, and I'm not sure he will have the authority to tell his people in Sachsen-Anhalt, hold off, you're not doing any kind of cooperation, or you're not going to be tolerating an AfD government.
yeah,
I'm curious, not curious is maybe the wrong word, but I wonder, will he have the authority to stop them, or will they simply say, well, we're elected members of the Landtag and we do what we think is right, and we're going to,
right.
our idea of responsibility is to let the AfD have a go at it, and we'll
Right.
tolerate them and see what they're doing, and because it's our democratic obligation. And
Yeah.
then how will Friedrich Merz stop them? And then he will go down in history as the chancellor or the CDU party leader who has not been able to prevent this.
Yeah. I mean, I think that whether he's able to keep his party in line is going to be very telling, and the whole, debate or discussion over the Brandmauer or the firewall, that even conservative politicians have been talking about, and really trying to keep the AfD out. But that
Yeah,
becomes harder to do as the numbers go up.
and it's a question of strategy too. I mean, I don't know how big the support is that comes from the CDU headquarters for the colleagues in Sachsen-Anhalt. I mean, what's the story they're going to tell for their candidate? Like what is the positive story that's supposed to lure people towards the CDU? I mean, it's not
Yeah.
enough to slam AfD, when it's obviously not working. And AfD has three times the budget, from what I hear, three times the budget that CDU has in
Yeah.
that small Bundesland. And the main candidate for AfD has like 500,000 followers on TikTok. And the CDU guy is fairly unknown. I mean, he's a very decent politician, a good man with probably good family values or whatever. But if people don't know him,
Yeah.
but they know the other guy, and he's eloquent, he's young, he owns a small business, or he used to run a small business. He's like the Schwiegersohn, the son-in-law type, that
Yeah.
somebody you cannot scare people with, it's the opposite.
Yeah. Well, and I think that one of the lessons from the last federal election has to be that the AfD, used social media very, very well to mobilize people.
Mhm.
Um, they should not be surprised by that in upcoming elections, right? But
Absolutely.
rather,
And the
but
CDU
rather,
is still at the level where they think, okay, so where are we going to put our Großflächenplakate? Where are we going to put the big
yeah,
the
the big
signs next
posters.
to the highway? It's like, should we put the poster here or there?
Yeah,
And it's like, it's not about posters anymore, guys. It's,
yeah. There's other outreach.
yeah.
Um, so, it's as we kind of start to come to a close, I want to maybe shift gears and ask you about something a little bit different, but it ties in here. Um, because during the last federal election, I think a lot of people were shocked, at the level of political violence in Germany. And it wasn't just directed against one party, right? There were attacks on Social Democrats and Greens. There were attacks on AfD, candidates. And I think a lot of people, in Germany were really sort of shocked that this was taking place. Of course, in the last week, we saw the assassination of Charlie Kirk in the US. I'm curious, sort of what the German reaction is to the killing of Charlie Kirk here, and what the responses have been like. But I'd also be really interested in hearing whether that's, released more of a debate around political violence in Germany.
Well, I mean, I think the German public was shocked that, like, or is shocked anytime a politician in the United States gets shot, because we're not used to gun violence in public or for political
Yeah.
reasons, because thankfully we have very strict laws again for gun use and for the possession of guns for private citizens. So I think it shakes us on another level yet if somebody is being killed like this. It's and I think in the case of Charlie Kirk, most Germans did not know him, had never heard of him, and but the fact reading about him that he's the father of two very young children, I think it did move a lot of people, and it's so there is a debate. I'm not sure there's a lot of debate about like what does this mean for the violence in the German political culture, because we just like here it's very different. But it's interesting that you get a lot of online hatred for people who, like especially journalists, who comment on this case in a way that infuriates people or people find inappropriate. And sometimes it's just about using wrong words. Sometimes it's about attributing positions to Charlie Kirk that he did not have. I mean, we had a ZDF colleague saying that, like, describing what, in his view, were the political opinions of Charlie Kirk, and he did make some mistakes there, or
Or he took some things out of
he
context,
took
I think
things, yeah, or he interpreted them in a way that was over the line, maybe, but how do you say across the line?
yeah.
But the level that people have reacted to it astounded me, like the intensity of the anger that these people were faced, like in Germany, showed me that there's like a very deep-seated, there are intense feelings
Yeah.
in this conversation. And yeah, I feel sorry for both the ZDF colleague, even if he made a mistake, he doesn't deserve to be like to get hatred. And another colleague from ZDF, Dunya Hayali, she she said she's taking a step back from social media and staying out of the public eye because she got so much online hatred about her words about Charlie Kirk, which I found were not out of line. We're still within the realms of the freedom of speech.
Yeah.
And yeah, and that it depresses me that this colleague cannot, I don't know, take a train anymore because she's fearing for her health and her
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
So this is very scary, I think.
Well, Melanie, I mean, I think it was shocking to a lot of people here as well, right? It was unexpected, and the results of the assassination, I think, have also um, made things even more challenging at the moment, right? In terms of the way in which there have been responses on both sides of the aisle. Um, and it's hard to watch something like that happen because it's not justified. I mentioned, I think, last week on the Kaffeepause that I was very impressed with a piece that Ezra Klein had in the New York Times, where he wrote about not agreeing with Charlie Kirk, but in terms of the content, but in terms of the practice of engaging in dialogue with people and talking about these issues. That's what political discourse is all about.
Absolutely.
And
I mean,
that's
I
important.
saw some people posting that, like, Charlie Kirk was against gun control, so that's what you get from that. And I
Yeah,
think it's horrible to say something like this. Nobody deserves to be murdered for their
yeah.
political positions or for engaging in political discourse. I
Yeah.
think it's just awful.
So Melanie, one last question before we bring this to a close, and that is, I mean, we've covered a lot of different topics in terms of domestic policy and foreign policy. What are some of the things, or what's the one thing that you would recommend people to watch in the week ahead? Is there any sort of interesting news story that's unfolding that you think people should be paying attention to?
We've covered a lot of ground already. I think the question of economic policy and reviving Germany is still a big thing. I think that the tax debate, I've seen interesting comments on the question of the hereditary tax, like how like the wealth in Germany that's being the way it's divided and it's being passed on from generation to generation, and for people who are not like born into a family of wealth. I mean, interestingly, even people like the CDU group leader in parliament, Jens Spahn, said that he felt this was not justified, and it got a lot of attention. So this question, like, which is a very basic fundamental question of justice in our tax system, is something that might accompany us for quite a bit, because what's the consequence of it?
Hmm.
Jens Spahn was on this talk show, Karen Mioska, on Sunday, and was grilled about it, and he couldn't really say so, but still he put himself out there, or he had put himself out there, saying, like, I'm open to discussing how wealth is distributed in this country, which for a CDU guy is quite a statement.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to see how SPD will dive into this, or if this maybe that's already a premonition of how how a reform package, how this could be a nod to the Social Democrats to, like, or a small
Hmm.
opening for
Hmm.
reform.
Well, Melanie, herzlichen Dank. It's always wonderful to speak with you. I'm greatly
Amazing.
appreciative of your taking the time, and I look forward to continuing the conversation once again.
Thank you, Stephen. All the best to you and your friends, and talk to you soon.
Bis bald.
Bis bald.